Welcome. Today, we're going to explore something pretty profound, the hidden architecture of our biggest breakthroughs. We're going to look at the underlying structure that governs our greatest leaps in understanding, and how the flaws in our thinking aren't failures at all, but actually gateways. But let's start with a question that probably feels familiar to you. Why is it that even our best ideas, our most solid theories, our most cherished beliefs, they always seem to have a flaw? That one little thing that just doesn't quite add up? Well, this brings us to a really powerful statement from the 18th century mystic, the Baal Shem Tov. He claimed he could find a loophole in any theory. Now, this wasn't about him just being difficult or contrarian. He was pointing to something much, much deeper, a fundamental principle about the nature of knowledge itself. He called it an unexplainable nothingness that lies at the core of every single system of thought. To really see this principle in action, we can look at a field we're all pretty familiar with, the history of science. It gives us a really clear and powerful framework for understanding how these necessary loopholes are what actually drive progress forward. Just think about this progression here. For centuries, Newtonian physics was the bedrock. It perfectly explained pretty much everything, from apples falling to planets orbiting. But it had a loophole. There were these tiny, nagging anomalies, like a slight wobble in Mercury's orbit, that the theory just couldn't explain. And that tiny crack is what forced the creation of a whole new, more encompassing theory, Einstein's relativity. See, progress didn't come from just adding more data. It came from having to resolve that contradiction. So here's the crucial point, the main takeaway. That contradiction, that loophole, it's not a failure. It's the very engine of growth. It's the necessary opening that forces us to level up, to ascend to a higher, more complete understanding of things. Okay, let's go a little deeper with this idea. This loophole isn't some defect in the system. It's a gateway. It's actually a built-in feature of any system that allows for transcendence to a higher level of order. The Hebrew word for contradiction, stira, is fascinating because it has this powerful double meaning. On one hand, it means a paradox, but its root also means to tear down. And it's related to the word for something that is concealed. So what does that tell us? A contradiction is basically a signpost pointing to a hidden truth, and it's the very thing that tears down an old framework to make room for a new one. And this pattern shows up everywhere. It's not limited to one domain. In philosophy, you've got the Baal Shem Tov's 0 point. In math, Gödel's incompleteness theorem literally proves that every system has truths it can't prove from within itself. And in physics, a black hole acts as a singularity, a gateway from which some scientists even theorize new realities can emerge. It's the same pattern again and again. So these external models are great, but they also have an internal parallel. We can actually map this same architecture right onto our own psyche. The Kabbalistic tradition offers this incredible framework for how this whole process of breakthrough happens inside our own consciousness. This model maps out 3 core intellectual faculties. First up, you have wisdom, or chokhmah. That's the raw flash of insight, the energy of the mind. Then comes understanding, or binah, which takes that insight and processes it. That's the intelligence part. And finally, there's knowledge, or dot, which fully integrates the idea into the whole psyche. And notice, each of these flows through a specific number of conduits. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The model reveals a deeper structure. Those numbers of conduits, 32, 50, and 72, they're not random. They actually follow a precise mathematical formula, 2n squared. The fact that there's such an elegant pattern here suggests this isn't just a metaphor, but maybe a description of a deliberate architecture for how consciousness evolves. So let's just see how this plays out. At the level of wisdom, that first flash of insight, the calculation gives us the 32 paths that an idea starts to travel down. Then, as that idea moves into understanding for deeper processing, the formula expands our capacity, creating 50 gates for a much deeper exploration. And finally, for that idea to be fully integrated as knowledge, or dot, the architecture completes with 72 bridges, connecting the idea to our very being. So you can see this clear expansion of our intellectual and psychological capacity at each stage. Let's really focus on that final faculty, dot, or knowledge. Its conduits are called bridges for a very important reason. They do something unique and absolutely crucial in our inner architecture. See, da'at isn't just about collecting facts. It's the faculty that takes an abstract idea and truly binds it to us. It is the process that transforms what we know in our minds into who we are and our very being. It's the difference between knowing a thing and embodying it. So, The function of these bridges is really threefold. First, they help us internalize an abstract concept. Second, they bridge that classic gap between our head and our heart, our intellect and our emotions. And finally, they integrate that unified understanding right into our core personality, making it a genuine part of our character. Okay, so how does this ancient architecture apply to our lives today, especially in things like leadership and our own personal growth? How can we use this map to navigate our own breakthroughs? Well, this model invites a really profound shift in perspective. When we hit a contradiction, our default is usually to see it as a problem to solve, and that often leads to reactivity, frustration. But what if we saw it instead as a space for becoming? That view invites us to practice discernment and presence. The goal isn't to eliminate the contradiction, but to seek the higher understanding it contains. So, in the language of presence-driven leadership, that loophole is an invitation for discernment, the capacity to really see what's going on. And the act of crossing that inner bridge to a more integrated understanding, that is the work of alignment, where our actions start to flow naturally from a deeper truth. So here is a little reflection prompt for you to take with you. Think about your life right now, your work, your relationships. Where is there a persistent tension, a paradox, or a contradiction? What if it isn't a problem you need to fix, but an invitation to a higher level of understanding? And here's a simple micro practice to put this into action. First, just identify one of those persistent challenges. Second, instead of rushing to solve it, just ask yourself, what inner bridge might this be asking me to build? And third, and this is key, just hold that question. Hold it with curiosity and patience. You don't need an immediate answer. Trust that the space you create is exactly where the breakthrough will emerge. Just remember, every system contains its own gateway to a higher level, and every challenge holds the seed of its own transcendence. So the question to leave with is this: what loophole in your own life is inviting you toward your next breakthrough?